ورسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول كل بدعة ضلالة.
What advice do you give to sisters modeling and posing for abaya shoots on social media, particularly on Instagram, and making money from collaborations with these clothes-selling businesses, believing it to be correct Islamic modesty and halal income that Allah is pleased with for them doing? Now, if they are modeling and posing, how can you use the term modeling and posing and then claim that it is modest? These are contradictory terms. The Prophet ﷺ forbade the women, and Allah subhanahu forbade the women from leaving their homes without their jilbab and their khimar and being covered. And Umar radiallahu anhu used to encourage the Prophet ﷺ before the revelation of the hijab came down that they should cover themselves. And then the verses were revealed about the women covering. And the purpose of that is to hide their beauty, to hide the beautification and the adornments that they are normally permitted to wear in front of their mahrams, in front of their fathers or particularly their husbands and their immediate family members like their brothers and their grandfather and their sons and their grandsons and so on. So Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when we gather the ayat and the hadith together, then we come to conditions of the hijab, or the conditions of the covering of the woman. And Shaykh al-Albani and Shaykh Ibn Baz, Ibn Uthaymeen, and the scholars of the Salaf from the Middle Ages, such as Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, Ibn Qudama in Al-Mughni and others, and going right back to the time of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum and the A'imma, such as Abu Hanifa and Malik, the Imams of the madhabs, Abu Hanifa and Malik and Shafi and Ahmed, that when you gather their words together alongside what they have understood from the ayat and from the ahadith, then the hijab of the Muslim woman, or the jilbab of the mar'atul muslima, of the Muslim woman, is that it should cover her entire body. From her head to her feet must be covered, to the exception that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed in the hadith of Asma bint Abi Bakr, and likewise in the hadith of Bilal and other similar ahadith, that he made an exception for the face and the hands, that the woman is allowed to keep her face and her hands uncovered, but the rest of her body from the top of her head to her feet must be covered, because that is what is demanded from her from the aspect of modesty. The garment must be wide so that her limbs, the shape of her body cannot be seen. So these garments that they wear, that is tight around the waist and tight around the bosom and tight around the hips, then that is not the jilbab of the mar'atul muslima. That is not the jilbab of the Muslim woman. That is just a garment from the fasiqat, from the sinful women and the transgressing women. That is not the jilbab of the Muslim woman that is commanded to cover herself when she leaves her home. Because that garment that she draws about herself is a garment that covers the whole of her body, with the exception of the hands and face, if she chooses. But if she covers her hands and face, then that is better, and it is closer to taqwa, but she's not obligated with that. And it must be wide, so that you can't see her body form, because the whole point of concealing her is you don't see the shapes of her bosom or her hips and her thighs and so on, because that is safer for her from being harassed. And please don't bring me the feminist argument that men shouldn't do that. Yes, men shouldn't do that, but men do that. Shouldn't will not save you. he shouldn't grope me. He shouldn't harass me. He shouldn't sexually abuse me. Yes, he shouldn't. And yes, it is haram. But the fact is that you are safer from harassment when you cover yourself correctly. You are safer. Because there are men out there who will harass. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects the Muslim woman. And it is a means of nearness for her to Allah. And she does not become a fitna for men. Like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, that I have not left a fitna more harmful upon men than women. And the first fitna to strike Bani Israel was the fitna of the woman. So Allah has commanded her to cover. And Allah has commanded the men to lower their gaze. That's what Allah has commanded. So a man should not be in seclusion with a woman. He lowers his gaze. And likewise the woman, she lowers her gaze also, because that is from her modesty. So a garment should be completely enveloping her body, and it should be wide, and it should be thick. So you cannot see through it. Because that defeats the purpose if you can see through the thing and you can see her shape, or you can see her body underneath, or her undergarments. Also the garment itself, that it should not be a garment of shuhra. It should not be a garment that is decorative, or rather the garment should not be ostentatious, that distinguishes you from the rest of the believing women. So you should not be recognized, so that is shuhra. Likewise, the garment should not be decorative. Don't tell me that you're modeling this type of jilbab that I'm talking about on these Instagrams, because that doesn't need modeling. That's what you just wear. You don't need to model it. It's in the Quran, it's in the Hadith. You wear it. You wear the thing. You don't model the thing. And you don't pose in the thing. What are you going to pose in that garment for? That covers the whole of your body. What are you posing? There's nothing to pose. Because all of your beauty is hidden behind it. So it is not decorative. So there's no like pearls dangling off it and silver bits and, what do you call it, tinsel glittering upon it, sequins or whatever you call them. None of that. Likewise, the garment is not in imitation of the kuffar. So it doesn't resemble the latest catwalk, whatever's taking place in Paris or Milan or London or New York. It doesn't resemble any of that. These are the conditions of the jilbab of the Muslim woman. And if she wears the niqab, better. But if she doesn't wear the niqab, then she is not to be disparaged. Because Asma radiallahu anha, the Prophet ﷺ told her, all of you should be covered except for this and this, pointing to his face and his hands. So a woman who doesn't cover her face, who doesn't cover her hands, she should not be rebuked and reviled or spoken ill of. However, she should not leave the home made up. She should not leave the home with makeup and lipstick and eyeliner and eyeshadow and foundation, blusher and whatever else, all these terms. She should not have any of that upon her. Nor should her fingers be covered with rings and jewelry dangling and bracelets dangling off her wrists. She should not wear high heels, because that is what the Jewish women used to do. In the times of Jahiliyyah, used to wear platforms to raise themselves high and walk amongst the men. She should not wear perfume amongst men. She can wear perfume for her husband in front of her mahrams. So this is the believing woman. Where is that, and where is the Instagram abaya model? So what she's doing is haram. And she's becoming a fitna for the men. And that's what she wants. In reality, you don't pose and you don't appear on these types of videos except that you want to be looked at. Do you think that if there was no one to look at her, she would do it? The reason why she's doing it is because she wants to get looked at. Let's not deceive, let not these women deceive themselves. Well, I'm not doing it for the men. I'm not doing it because I want to be looked at. What are you doing it for then? Let's say you didn't have a single view on Instagram or YouTube or wherever it is. You're going to do number 2? There is not going to be episode 2. There is no part 2. Because part 1 got 0 views. So part 2 is not coming. The reason why you're doing it, because every day you're looking at the numbers. I've got 23 views. 24. Look, 26. That's what she's doing. She's looking at the number of views. If the views have increased, she'll do part 2. She'll model another so-called abaya. This woman is a fitna to the men. My advice to her, fear Allah, my daughter, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, binti. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will question you. Do not put yourself out there like that. That you are a fitna for the men because you want to be. And some of them even will tell you that. I'm doing it because I want men to look at me. Don't do that, my sister. Don't do that. Get married. Get a good husband. And you can do whatever you want with him.